Okay, let's jump right into something pretty wild today. We're going to explore a topic that's really on the outer edges of what we understand, clairvoyance. But this isn't just about spooky stories. We're actually going to look at a theoretical model that tries to explain how it might work, and it's called the fractal mind. To get us started, check out this quote from the source material. It really throws you right into the clairvoyance state of mind. The only thing that captivates me is coincidence, analogy, simultaneity. Right away, you know this isn't just about seeing the future. It's about perceiving a world that's woven together by these incredible hidden connections. So, here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with what the clairvoyance consciousness actually feels like. Then, we'll see how science has tried to put a label on it. After that, we'll get into the big debate, synchronicity versus psi, and we'll wrap up with the really mind-bending idea of the fractal brain model. All right, first things first. What does it actually feel like to be clairvoyant? Well, according to our source, it's like living in a world of constant, unstable sensation. So the source material tells us that this isn't some kind of stable sixth sense you can just turn on and off. Nope. It's a state of restless consciousness, where reality itself feels like it's always shifting, always in flux. I mean, just imagine experiencing the world that way for a moment. It's a completely different way of being. And this experience has some really specific qualities. We already talked about being captivated by coincidence, but there's also this idea that their consciousness is always being modified by what the source calls things presence, basically a super heightened awareness of all the objects and energies around them. And here's the key. This instability isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's a fundamental part of their senses, something they're subject to, not something they're in control of. Okay, so if this is the experience, how in the world do you even begin to study it? Well, the first step is always to try and give it a name, and that brings us to this idea of metagnomy. It's an attempt to put a name to the unknown. You know, for centuries, people have been trying to figure this stuff out, but in the early 20th century, there was this big push to actually categorize it scientifically. A researcher, a Dr. Osti, came up with the term metagnomy as a kind of umbrella term for this whole collection of paranormal faculties. But let's be honest, metagnomy sounds a little clinical, doesn't it? That's why I love this other phrase Dr. Osti used. It translates from French to the faculty of hyper-knowing. It just so perfectly captures that feeling of an expanded, deeper awareness. And now we get to the really big debate. How do we explain hyper-knowing? This brings us to a huge fork in the road. Synchronicity versus psi. Are we talking about some kind of meaningful coincidence, or is there an actual flow of information happening here? So, one of the biggest ideas on the table comes from the legendary psychologist Carl Jung. His followers would look at all this and say, hey, this isn't about cause and effect. They'd argue it's all about synchronicity, which is basically a fancy term for a deeply meaningful coincidence.
And you've really got to grasp this distinction because it's critical. On one side, you have synchronicity. It's acausal. No cause, no effect, no information flowing from A to B. The only thing that matters is the meaning you find in it. On the other side, you have traditional psi research, think ESP. That model implies a causal flow of information, where things like repetition and consistent results are absolutely key to proving it even exists. They're like polar opposites.
But what if the line between them isn't so sharp? What if it's a bit blurry? The parapsychologist Storm suggested that maybe these two ideas aren't totally separate. He proposed that archetypal conditions, which is a very Jungian concept, could be meant metacausally in lab experiments, meaning in a way that's totally beyond our normal ideas of cause and effect. In the end, though, Jung himself kind of backed away from any simple causal explanation. For him, the problem wasn't a lack of weird events or evidence. He felt the real issue was that our theories just weren't good enough to make sense of it all. We were trying to measure the ocean with a teacup. And that is the perfect lead into our final and honestly the most mind-bending part of this whole thing, the fractal brain model. This is an attempt to come up with a potential mechanism for how this kind of perception could happen, and it's grounded in mathematics. So before we connect this to the brain, let's just quickly touch on where this idea even came from. The concept of these strange, infinitely repeating objects was first imagined by a mathematician named Georges Cantor, but it was B. Mandelbrot who later came along and gave them their famous name, fractal. So what the heck is a fractal? Simply put, it's a geometric structure that's self-similar. And that just means that no matter how much you zoom in, the pattern looks the same. It resembles itself at every single scale. You've seen them everywhere in nature. Think about a lightning bolt, a snowflake, or the jagged edge of a coastline.
Okay, you ready for the big leap? Here it is. The theory our source puts forward is that the human brain itself is a fractal object. And because of this incredibly complex, self-similar structure, it's capable of entering into what they call a dynamic duality with another object. Like, you guessed it, the classic crystal ball.
So how could this possibly work? Well, the model breaks it down into a kind of four-step feedback loop. First, the fractal brain projects a pattern onto an object. Second, that object, the crystal ball, receives this pattern and basically reflects it back, but it's been shifted across different scales. Third, the object sends this transformed information back to the brain as images. And finally, and this is the craziest part, scenes from the past or the future get reprojected into the brain through a process called delocalization, where information isn't tied to one point in time. It's like a complex echo bouncing between two compatible fractal patterns. And this isn't just some wild idea floating in space. The source actually ties this theory to something we can measure: brainwaves. These kinds of phenomena are often linked to a very specific brainwave frequency, right around 7 to 8 hertz. That's the exact border between the alpha state, which is relaxed awareness, and the theta state of deep meditation or light sleep. It's a liminal space, a doorway, neurologically speaking. So where does all of this leave us? I mean, think about the journey we just took. We went from the restless, pattern-seeking mind of a clairvoyant through the scientific debates, all the way to this wild but elegant model of a fractal brain. It's a pretty radical idea for sure, but it leaves us with one heck of a question to chew on. If our own consciousness operates like a fractal, a self-repeating pattern at every scale, what other profound patterns in the universe are we yet to see?